What's up, guys? In this episode, we talk all about the squat, who should be performing the squat, what type of squat we prefer, the benefits of the squat, and we tackle the controversy if elite athletes should be performing ATG squats. We wrap it up by describing a squat routine filled with frequency, sets, reps, and our favorite squat. My name is Mike Osuna, his name is Rob Silver, and this is the 8-9 Project. All right, folks, so we're back here with 8-9 Quickie. So today we're going to discuss squats. We're going to get right into it, Rob. Never mind the chit-chat. So I'm going to pose a question to you, Rob. The question is this: who should be squatting? Okay, we know that performance athletes should be squatting, but is there a need for anybody chasing physical fitness to be squatting? Go.
On the most basic level, you said who should be squatting. I think ideally everyone should be squatting. Will everyone be? No. Whether it is due to most of the time, the most common reason people will not be or should not be squatting, flexibility limitations. Okay. They have tight muscles that put them in positions where they are not able to safely accomplish a squat. They should not be squatting because they will get much greater health benefits by fixing those flexibility limitations, ideally then putting them in a position to squat. Should athletes be squatting? Again, same thing. If they can safely get into the position, absolutely. So ideal world, everybody should be squatting. In a real world, not everyone. And
I want to kind of clear everybody's image here of when we say squatting, I mean just performing a squat, a body weight squat, coming off of a chair, coming off of a toilet, so on and so forth. So I would agree with you that, yes, everybody should be squatting. I think that, I work because of my firefighter position. I work with a lot of older folks, geriatrics, and the biggest, most alarming thing that we find with them is their inability to squat. And a lot of these folks, many times we run calls where they're sitting in a chair that's a little bit too low, they're below parallel, and they simply can't get up out of that squat. So these bodyweight squats are imperative not just for performance, but for longevity and staying out of a nursing home as long as you possibly can.
Correct. There have actually been various tests of anaerobic power, so power output in the elderly, where the test is essentially how many squats or how many chair sit stands can you do in a set period of time. There are protocols for as many chair sit stands in 15 seconds, 30 seconds. There are various options out there. But what you do is you figure out how old is the individual, what's their body weight, how many times can they sit down and stand up in a matter of time. You plug it in, you plug that number and the variables about that individual into an equation, and you get an estimate of power. And that estimate of power then basically becomes of, if it's high, you're good. If it's low, your risk at even having to go into a nursing home or requiring help to do daily tasks, that risk of that happening to you goes up. So we need to develop power in the elderly. So squatting or sitting down and standing up into a chair is something that's going to occur every day no matter what. So if for your aging individuals, they're not going to safely be able to, or they're not going to be able to get into a perfect squat position, they still need to be squatting. Right. They still, in the sense that they need to sit down and stand up, even if they go into a posterior pelvic tilt, because it's what they're doing on a daily basis.
Okay. I agree with you, especially in the demographic, and it's near and dear to my heart only because I see it every third day constantly. I work next to an elderly community, 10,000 apartments with folks that are over the age of 70, and this is a constant call that we're running, is just helping folks up. So it's very prominent in my world and for most firefighters that work in their zone. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm sorry?
Imagine how much of taxpayer dollars we'd be able to save if all those older individuals had appropriate trainers, or that were, had exercise backgrounds that were able to make them live independently with a higher quality of life for longer.
Right. I'm going to open up a gym in Century Village. That's my next venture there. All right. So let's talk a little bit. Let's take a step back here. In the squat, what muscles? Everybody says squat is a total body developer. In the squat, what muscles, generally speaking, does it develop?
Yeah. So it depends on where the loading's going to be. So if you are doing a body weight squat, you'll probably have similar contributions from the glutes and the quads. Maybe a little bit more on the posterior chain, depending on how you squat. Hamstrings will play a role in there. Your adductors, your groin, your inner thigh muscles will also play a role in the squat. But the glutes, the quads are going to be the prime movers. Hamstrings are going to assist. Inner thigh, the adductors are going to assist as well. When you're doing a back squat, it's going to bias a little bit more towards the glutes. When you do a front squat, it's going to bias a little bit more towards the quads.
Okay. So if you had to, like the old adage is, if you had to pick one movement, would it be the squat? You only have one movement to do. Would it be the squat for you?
That's obviously an impossible, I think, question to answer when you're really talking about the whole variety of population. But when you are boiling down to human movement and functional movement, the squat is definitely going to be at the top of that pyramid.
Right. I think there's so many movements, and if somebody was to keep track of how many times they perform a squat a day, right? Like if they had a squat tracker, maybe a device that they put, it's a pair of shorts, and every time it squats, it sends off a beeper, it calculates it. I don't think people realize how many times they actually perform some sort of the squat throughout the day, right? So
correct.
Sitting and standing, using the toilet, picking up objects, you're still performing some sort of hip flexion that could be called a partial or full squat, depending on what you're doing. So I believe it's one of those movements that we talk about it so much in our world when it comes to chasing performance, but it's so imperative for life. And towards the latter part of my mom's life, my sister and I did the best that we could to get her to squat. And you were saying it earlier, and this is what, kind of prompted the thought was sit down, stands ups. We did it all the time. I didn't call them squats to my mom. I basically told her, Mom, you're going to sit in this chair. And she had one of those recliners that go up and down. And I put it at a level that was easy for her to do. And I basically just told her, listen, you're going to do this 10 times. You're going to sit down. You're going to stand up. Only because I knew it wasn't until the day that she's not allowed to get out of bed was the day that she had to go into a nursing home or an ALF. And that's pretty much where the latter part of her life was, an ALF, because she could no longer squat. She couldn't help herself up. And that's what's happening to a lot of our older generation. So we already discussed on what type of muscles it works. So let's talk a little bit about the progression of the squat here. So somebody comes into a gym and they're, everybody, they get assessed. A good coach would assess them on the squat and their ability to perform a squat. So now it's time to add some load to that squat. What do you prefer? You prefer back squat, front squat? Would you go with a Bulgarian squat? Or do you go into lunges, which is a single leg squat movement? What do you prefer?
Yeah, and the general template that I would have is, all right, so our end game is going to include back squats and front squats. So what are the flexibility limitations that are going to present themselves? Where do I need to improve stability? So when we talk about muscles involved in any squat, the trunk and the role the trunk plays in stability is just as important, if not more so, than the strength of the glutes and the quads and the hamstrings. You need to have a stable pelvis. You need to have a stable torso. So your progressions to get you ready to squat need to make sure that those muscles are firing properly. Otherwise, you're going to have improper spinal mechanics when you're squatting, which is not going to carry over into jumping mechanics if you're an athlete, or longevity if you're a general population looking to be fit. So to use that, my answer would be I'm going to challenge the individual stability, make sure their trunk stabilizers are firing properly, and we're getting the hips and the glutes to fire appropriately. So first exercises are going to be some sort of asymmetrically loaded, which means I'm going to load one side of the body, like a sandbag over a single shoulder, a kettlebell load on one arm, dumbbell on one side, medicine ball on one side, some sort of asymmetrical loading. Unilateral exercise means I'm going to challenge one leg at a time. So a reverse lunge with the sandbag on one shoulder, excellent exercise to do. Might be a little challenging if you're working with older clientele, so you might just need to do a split squat or a step back or an assisted squat where they're holding, you as a trainer or coach are holding on to the client either through hands or have them holding onto a handrail the whole time without any loading. Get the activation firing that way. Get the glutes going where the progression would go. If you're doing split squats, the progression would be to a reverse lunge, then to a Bulgarian squat, then to a back squat, ideally.
And somebody listening to this right now, if they're like, that's a great idea, I'm going to do some reverse lunges with a sandbag. Which shoulder would you recommend they put that sandbag on, the working leg or the non-working leg?
It depends on the goal.
Okay.
All right. So if you're stepping back with your left leg, that means that your right glute is going to be the prime mover of that exercise. So if you're stepping back with the left leg, you put the sandbag on the left shoulder. Now you're going to get a cross stabilization through the middle, so you're really going to target those trunk stabilizers. If you put it on the right shoulder, so you are stepping back with the left leg, your sandbag or sand log, whatever it is you're using, is on the right side, so the forward leg. Now that's going to be targeting activation through the prime mover. So if your goal is more activation through the glute, put it on the same side. If it's trunk stability, you would put it on the opposite side. They're both good exercises. You can't go wrong if you forgot already which one is you want to work on.
And we challenge you guys. It's an extremely challenging movement. We do them quite often here, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Just a lunge, a split squat, a Bulgarian squat, that in itself is, with body weight, is a challenging movement. So adding a load to it, especially what you're describing, it's a movement that I would recommend for those with the ability to perform them. I want to pose this question for you. It's a little bit controversial, but I'm sure that we could talk this out here. So let's say that you own Rob's Strength Gym, okay, and a sports specific athlete, let's call it a basketball player, that's at the top of his game, at the top of anybody's game, meaning he's the best basketball player in the world, and he walks in and he says, you know who he is, and he says, I've never squatted in my life. I'm naturally gifted. I've been touched by the hand of God to play basketball, and that's what I do now. And I make millions off of, my contract and endorsements. And I just wanted some off-season training. Do you put that guy to squat?
I mean, if they've never squatted before, chances are maybe take that step back. Mm-hmm. Again, in an ideal world, in a perfect world, yes. Everyone will be squatting at some point. We know that a loaded back squat will carry over into sports performance. In this situation where you have a high-end athlete that's never done it before, it will probably be years before you're going to include it, especially with any sort of loading in that program. So I don't want to say, no, I'm never going to, but at the same point, I don't want to say, yes, absolutely. It might not be beneficial for them. It might take a few years to get the mechanics there, to get the flexibility there, to get the stability there. And especially with basketball players, they're notorious for their long limbs. Right? You have to be tall to play basketball unless you're freakishly athletic like Muggsy Bogues or Nate Robinson. With long limbs, as you'll see on most basketball players or defensive linemen, offensive linemen, wide receivers, getting to or below parallel is going to be out of the question 99% of the time. So we're talking about now a partial range of motion squat, because that's just mechanically what is going to be the ideal squat for that individual if we ever get him there.
Right. And my fear is sometimes that you get these coaches that believe that don't take the sum of all parts and understand that if this guy's at the top of his game, has he reached his genetic and athletic potential? Meaning, by me forcing him to squat or wasting any time and energy throughout the day, because we all know we're all limited. We have the same time span here. Wasting any time or energy to teach this guy how to squat properly, and working our way up through some program to get him to back squat or front squat under load, because that's my ego. That's what I love to do. Is it going to increase his performance, which his only goal? He doesn't care about developing his thighs. He doesn't care about his glutes. He doesn't care about really jumping high. Well, I mean, when you have a 42 introvert, does a 42.5 introvert make any difference? Do the risk outweigh the reward? And this is something that I play with sometimes. Like I actually give it some thought, spend some time on it, because if that was to happen to me, I would have to understand, one, what his goal is, and two is, do I believe that I could get him to perform better? Let's remind ourselves here, he's at the top of his game. Do I believe that his game on the court, that squatting is going to transfer to his game on the court? And do I waste any time as opposed to working on just straight conditioning and not risking injury with this, folks? Because it's exactly what you said. It depends on the individual. We're talking basketball players here. And a lot of basketball players or top people sometimes get ridiculed by shorter I should call it strength athletes for not being able to perform, or not performing, not being able, not performing these movements as they do because they don't understand that longer limbs cause for different angles. So for a guy like myself to get
well, how tall are you?
I'm 6'3".
You're 6'3". I'm on a good day 5'7".
Okay.
My full range of motion squat, if my glutes are touching my calves at the end of the day, like the old Olympic weightlifting, Rob,
right,
I'm probably still going through less range of motion than if you squatted just above parallel.
Right.
Doing less mechanical work by body weight if I'm going all the way down, all the way up. So who has it easier?
Right.
Me, absolutely. So you got to keep that in mind just from a proper work perspective, that they're doing a lot more if they're tall, no matter what.
That being said, do you think that there's a play for a quarter squat? If I was to say, you know what, I'm just going to quarter squat this guy, he's 6'9", and do you think that he's getting any benefit from a quarter squat?
You you put the individual through the range of motion that they're safely able to accomplish.
Got it. And
right?
For the audience, quarter squat meaning as opposed to going to parallel. So hips and knees are in a line horizontally. It's above the hip and knees, right? So quarter squat is what we're defining here.
Yeah, and the issue that I'll say with the term quarter squat is that people are going to say that's a specific height, right? Your hips are specifically at 90 degrees of knee flexion, right? We can see that your femur is at 45 degrees to the ground. Well, if that individual can go a little bit lower with proper mechanics, yeah, we're going to go a little bit lower.
Right.
So you're going to challenge the athlete. If, let's say, they are safely able to squat, you've progressed them for a little bit, you've done some axial loading with the barbell on the back already, so they're ready to do it. You know how low they're going to be able to get without any pelvic deviations or spinal deviations, and that's where you're going to stop. If it's at a quarter squat, that's what you decided, that's okay. If it's just below, that's great as well. If it's to parallel, that's even better. If it's just above parallel, it's going to be so determinant on the individual. And when specifically you see that pelvis start to wobble, if it goes into a posterior pelvic tilt, we call the butt wink most commonly, you have to stop them right above that point, right? Wherever that is in the movement.
Absolutely, because they're risking of injury. Let's wrap it up with this. Let's assume that they are able to squat, full squat, or squat hips below knees. Give me a recommendation for a week. How many times a week would you have somebody squatting? What would be your favorite squat movement? And let's call this for let's do the aesthetic side of this, right? So it's a girl or guy that wants to build their quads and their butt and their hammies. So not performance, but what would you say for hypertrophy? What kind of overall general squat program would you put them on?
So if like you said, if they're cleared to squat, they have the flexibility, they have the stability, they're able to perform that movement safely. You can do progressions, you can do some form of periodization, whether it's linear, whether it's wave, which is just different fancy terms of how you're going to do your sets and rep schemes. For squats, I'm always a big fan of anything in the 3 to 5, 3 to 6, maybe up to 8 rep range per set, right? So you're doing one set of 3 reps, let's say, maybe not only one set, 2, 3, 4 sets around that weight. Challenge yourself. Doesn't need to be freakishly heavy. You don't have to do a 3 rep max. You just want it to be heavy in that 3 to 4 to 5 range, because it still needs to be perfect. And then you're going to follow it up with some more targeted exercise on that area. You would follow it up with Romanian deadlifts or reverse lunges or step ups, so that you're getting it where you're doing more reps on the accessory exercises, using the squat kind of as an introduction to challenge yourself, get the hormone response that's going to cause the muscle growth that you want, challenge your body with the heavy loading that you'll do, even though it's not ridiculously heavy for the movement, and then you'll get the higher volume in with the accessory exercises. Yeah,
I agree. I would on my end of it, if it's somebody just looking for hypertrophy, I'd probably do 2 to 3 times a week, depending on what level they're at, whether they're a novice or an intermediate. I would probably work one day with that hypertrophy rep range, which is the 8 to 12-ish, and another day more on the metabolic stress side, which is probably the 20 to 30. So my load would vary, obviously, depending on my RPE or the amount of weight that they would do. I'd probably leave a couple of reps in reserve, 2 to 3 reps in reserve, meaning I wouldn't have them work till failure. My squat of choice would probably be a back squat, just because I'm able to, all the benefits that you said with the muscular development, with it also being able to progressively overload the back squat. You could add so much weight over a period of time. So that's one movement that I would choose. So Rob, I think that's all the time that we got. So guys, we appreciate you guys listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends. Your feedback is extremely important to us, so please leave a comment under this social media post. We promise to read all the comments and answer all the questions. Remember, the louder the voice, the clearer the message. Thank you, guys.